Hi, everybody. It's not Monday, and it's not 1 o'clock, and it's been a few weeks since we've been together. I took a vacation, and then I was out of the country. But we're restarting our series of shiurim, officially called, excuse me, Pirkei Avot History and Hashkafa, which is sponsored by or brought to you by the Tel Aviv International Synagogue, under the inspired leadership of Rabbi Ariel Constantine. And just an announcement, I will have the privilege of substituting for Rabbi Constantine this coming Shabbat in Tel Aviv, so that if any of you are interested, please come by, say hi, and it's a wonderful congregation. Maybe you'll find your place there for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In any event, that's the announcement from now on. Next week, obviously, this year will not take place on Monday, anyways, because it's Rosh Hashanah, and then hopefully we will go back into the to the normal shvung of Mondays at 1. I'm taking a break this week and before Yom Kippur from discussing Pirkei Avot, and we're going to dedicate this this class, to a discussion of issues in the Machzor. We started a little bit before the vacation, when I shared with you some insights about Elul from the Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, of the first Lubavitch Rebbe, which my teacher, Rav Soloveitchik, who was the quintessential, or essentially perceived to be the quintessential misnagid, Litvak, the non-chassid, was, of which he was very fond, and I'm going to continue. That was then. Now, what I'd like to do is follow with a mandate that he actually gave us, his students, already so many years ago, and that is that part of the preparation for anything in Judaism requires study. It's interesting. I recently heard a very fine, very interesting podcast on another station it's called the Orthodox Conundrum. It's sponsored by Rabbi Scott Kahn, and the discussion, it's online, you can see it, was about bringing spirituality into religious observance. I have a lot to say on that subject, and we'll touch a bit of it today. But one thing that didn't get said there, and I think is very important, and that is that it's certainly important, it's critical, there is no word for how important it is to infuse our observance with God awareness, and with a sense of His presence, and the sense of His having commanded us to do certain things and live our lives a certain way. That's true. But spirituality is sort of like amorphous. It's sort of like feel good. It's not what the Torah really is talking about. We're talking about an encounter with God, and a matter of God awareness when we do anything, but certainly when we pray and when we observe holidays. So in order to do that, it's not enough just to feel. Judaism demands, as opposed to other religions, by the way, where meditations or mantras or other things perhaps might be the way to go in terms of feeling spiritual. The Torah Judaism demands study, that you have to actually create an alliance of the heart and the mind, and to enlist both of them in preparing for sacred occasions. The best way, Rav Soloveitchik always said, to do that is to study the specific liturgy, the specific prayers for a holiday, because in the prayers, and more particularly in the special poetry that's appended, that's included, that's added to the prayer service, one finds formulated insights. One can discover insights which will enrich and deepen our experience and understanding, and experience and understanding in Judaism go together. It's not feel good. It's a matter of a total immersion, heart and mind, in the whatever the occasion is. In the case of the High Holy Days, obviously one, as is well known, and we talked about this again a few weeks ago, the major motif, certainly for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur a little bit different. But for Rosh Hashanah, the major theme of Rosh Hashanah is God as King, and everything comes from that. On Rosh Hashanah, we proclaim God to be the King. We are judged on Rosh Hashanah because the King is the ultimate judge. Zichronot, we talk about there, the Musaf service is divided into 3 parts: Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. Malchuyot talks about God's kingdom. Zichronot is not about remembrance. The word liskor in Hebrew really means, on a deeper level, means to judge, to take up a case, to remember, to sort of I'm not a lawyer, but I think there's sort of like, if there's something on the docket, if something's been tabled, then you bring it up for reconsideration. So, who is the ultimate judge is God. And then Shofarot, it has sort of a 2 or 3 part nuance to it, all related again to the question of to God as King. Because Shofarot is, first of all, we declare God's kingship. That's how you declare a king. I mean, anybody who watched, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, anybody who watched the funeral of the Queen Elizabeth, there were so many trumpets. It was unbelievable. And it's a little bit different than a Jewish funeral. There's a lot of music, and we don't have a lot of music at funerals, if at all. But that's the function of the shofar, is to declare kingship. And then the shofar also declares revelation. What's revelation? If not God revealing Himself, revealing His will to us, and legislating for us, which is the function of the king. And finally, the function of the shofar is to declare redemption, and God is the ultimate redeemer. Now, I understand that this idea of God as king is something that a lot of us can't. I don't like that expression. But all right, that's what people say today. Can't wrap our heads around. But we saw it this week. We saw what it means to have a king and how people revere a king. Now, the kings of England are not absolute rulers, but you do get the sense of reverence and just excuse me a minute, a sense of reverence and awe that people experience as part of their encounter with the king. Part of the problem with our society is the fact that because we're so autonomous and because we're so democratic, those of us who are people of faith forget that it's all very well and good, but at the end of the day, we may rule ourselves democratically, and that's proper. According to halacha, also basically the Torah also endows sovereignty in the people. We may choose a king, but according to most authorities, even if the people decide that they want a different mode of government, then they're allowed to do so, because again, sovereignty is endowed in the people. At least as far as daily things are concerned. The question of interpreting the Torah is another story, but that's for another time. We're not used to the idea we're responsible to somebody else, and yet, if there's anything that Rosh Hashanah is supposed to teach us, is that we are subordinate, and that we have limits, and that our relationship with God is dialectical. Avinu Malkeinu, we're intimate with Him, capital H, but we also have to be deferential to Him. There's a limit to how far we can go, and it's the acceptance of that aspect of our religion that Rosh Hashanah comes to reinforce. If we don't have the structure, if we don't have deference to God, then the whole thing falls apart. It becomes Judaism becomes an exercise in self-indulgence, in feel-good, and that's not what it is about. That's another interpretation, but that's not the authentic way the Torah presents itself. And at the same time, when we talk about kingship, we're not talking about kingship even where there are absolute monarchs, because God is a different type of a different kind of king, by virtue of the fact, as Maimonides says in the beginning of the Mishnah Torah, by virtue of the fact that God basically owns the world by virtue of bringing it into existence, and our existence depends upon His existence. that creates an attitude or a stance or a relationship of total and absolute dependence, which doesn't exist in any other relationship. We are not totally dependent on anybody or anything. We're dependent on not to that degree. We're dependent on each other. We're dependent on our family. Yes, that's true. But at the end of the day, we could be alone, but we can't be, and that's the point here. We cannot. We are totally dependent on God, and therefore that involves deference and humility at the same time as being empowering and elevating. I think that the basic idea comes out nicely in the second chapter of the Mishneh Torah, where Maimonides redefines the commandments to love God and to fear God. And he describes how love of God is engendered by our attraction to the beauties of the world, to the beauties of creation, to the wonders of creation, and we are empowered as those who have intelligence and are created in the image of God to know more and more and more. And the more that you know about creation, the more you know about how God works, the more intimate the relationship. But there's a limit to that, because you come to a certain position, to a certain point, and you can't know more than that. There's a limit to what we can know. That's very hard for modern man to realize, that we are limited. We'd like to be arrogant. Arrogance may, in fact, be the original sin of our generation. But there's a limit to what we can know. Try to ponder what infinity is, and that'll last about. And you realize how quickly, or perfection, or things that we know exist, but I know I'm using an Anselmian kind of image, but still works. We realize our own limits. We don't like to think about them, but I would think that we like to be narcissistic. But that's not the. But so what? One of the things that the shofar is supposed to do, I think what shofar is supposed to do, is shake us out of that, and to realize, put things in perspective. In fact, interestingly, Maimonides has a famous statement about the significance of the shofar. He says, but he puts it interestingly in the laws of repentance. He says, even though blowing the shofar is just a divine fiat, it's not fiat, a dictat, and we have to do it, still there is an inner meaning for it. There is an inner purpose that it's supposed to affect. What is it? To wake up and not let yourself get caught up in your quotidian and daily concerns, and just look around and put things in perspective to see who you are and who you're not, and what you're supposed to be. But the shofar also is an act of establishing God's kingship. You see, the two go together. Declaring God as king goes together with realizing that we are empowered by being able to come close to God, but there's a limit to where we can go, because as Rabbi Nissim of Gerona says, Ilu yidativ hayitiv. If I could know God fully, then I certainly then I would have been him, and that's not possible. So what's the result? So when you reach your limits, what happens? That's when awe comes in. You take 25 steps backwards, and you realize my limits, and I realize that there was a certain arrogance involved in how far I pushed myself. And yet God beckons you back. He wants to be served with love. He wants people to come as close, but as close as they can, realizing that there's a limit. And you spend your life going back and forth between the two. In other words, awe and love work together. Awe and love merge together as a permanent dynamic, a permanent dialectic in our religious lives, and that comes to expression beautifully halachically in Rosh Hashanah. There is a famous argument. If you read the Mavzor, yes, you can actually, especially the Ashkenazi Mavzor, which is much puts the emphasis much more on to a much greater extent on this. It's a lot of, I'm nobody, and who am I, and what am I? If you look at the Piyutim, for the repetition of the Amidah on both days, in the morning for Shacharit, you'll see that there's one theme, and that is the poet goes over and over and over and over again, using every word he can possibly find to express just how great and other and overwhelming God is, and how overwhelming is his kingdom. And that our job on Rosh Hashanah is to be Makabel Ol Malchut Shamayim, to accept the burden of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. But he runs out of words. I mean, one of the reasons why there's so many words here is because words collapse when you're discussing God. But you got to keep trying, because you're trying to get a message across to the worshiper. So you could walk away in Rosh Hashanah and with the idea that Rosh Hashanah is indeed a sad day, or it's a scary day. It's a terrifying day. What do you call it? The Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. Maybe it's terrifying. And then at the same time, there is an argument among the Talmudic interpreters as to whether there is a mitzvah, whether the commandment of simcha, of rejoicing, of being happy, obtained on Rosh Hashanah. Yeh simcha b'Rosh Hashanah, ein simcha b'Rosh Hashanah. What do you mean? Is there a mitzvah to eat? Of course, that's very Jewish, right? Is there a mitzvah to eat? Is there a mitzvah to drink wine and eat meat and be happy and sing and rejoice? So you'll sit there and say, wait a minute, how can you possibly be? How can a person possibly be happy on Rosh Hashanah? It's such a scary day. And in fact, the Talmud itself says, why don't you say Hallel on the songs of prayers they say on Yontif? Why don't you say them on Rosh Hashanah? So the Gemara says that God replied, how can you, the books of life and death are opened before me. How is it possible that you should sing praise and be happy? On the other hand, we paskin, the normative opinion is that there is a mitzvah to be happy on Rosh Hashanah. So how does that work? It works precisely the way I told you before. God has invited us to be his subjects. That's a tremendous honor. That's something in which to rejoice. That's a privilege like nobody's privilege. We are the ones, we Jews are the ones who do, in fact, effect that coronation. I don't feel it so much in the over 30 years I've lived in Israel, but when I lived in the States, I remember thinking how discordant it is to be in shul all day and in such an uplifting and serious and overwhelming atmosphere. And you walk outside and nobody knows it's Rosh Hashanah. And for those of us who believe the world is judged and everybody's going about their daily business, nobody blew shofar for them, as it were. So it's a privilege. It's something to celebrate. At the same time, a person has to know their place. If you watched the way the procession went during the burial of the Queen, this one's here and this one is there, and dear Balak, God forbid you should ever go in your wrong place. You can't go beyond your place. And we have to know our place, how far we can go. We have to push ourselves, and at the same time, and that's because God wants us there. He wants us as close as possible. And yet, there's a limit. So there is awe, and there is joy. There is simcha, and there is kingship. And if you take, again, this pops up in dozens of different ways throughout the various piyutim. And they require careful study. I recommend this Mauser, of course, the one with Rav Soloveitchik's commentary, which was done beautifully by a rabbi or Dr. Arnold Lustiger. But there are many others. There are many others. Steinsaltz, there's all kinds of Lubavitch, there's other Hasidic approaches and so on. But the point is that by doing the preparation, by preparing ourselves intellectually, understanding the issues that are faced on Yom Tov, we have the opportunity and the possibility to be able to infuse our Rosh Hashanah with a total restart, and with the level of meaning and experience as we come into the courts of the King than would be otherwise. And that's why I'm sure that this is going to happen. That my feed on Twitter and on Facebook, certainly on Twitter, will fill up with people saying, "What books are you bringing to shul to read on Rosh Hashanah?" As if the service is of no value, as if the prayers were a bunch of songs. I find that blasphemous. Unless you're going to read, in between the Aliyahs, you're going to read Shari Tshuva, you're going to read Rav Lichtenstein's discourses on Tshuva, you're going to read, I don't know, you're going to read the Rav Hutner, you're going to read Garis Tshuva of the Alter Rebbe, I don't care what. But people are going to sit there and read history books, or some kind of sociological thing, because, now I'm in shul, I got plenty of time, I don't pay attention to the davening. That's blasphemous. I'm sorry. That's blasphemous. Can you imagine? Can you imagine any British Jew who's going to be invited to the coronation of King Charles III, brings a book to read, and Charles is sitting on his throne and sees you not paying attention? You're reading a book. If you're reading Torah, that's what you're supposed to do. If you're learning Torah, keep your Gemara open. But even that, study the Machzor. Prepare yourself intellectually with ideas, and that will open up your heart as well, automatically. I wish everybody ektiva v'chatima tova. You should be written and sealed immediately with tzaddikim gemurim for a happy and healthy, emphasize healthy. This is the first year without, I think, first post-corona year. And year, Tafshin Pei Gimel. And let us hope that when we meet, who knows, when we meet Mirz Hashem in 2 weeks, I guess, before Yom Kippur, that we will have started our process of coming as close to the King as the King will let us come. One other thing, I have if those of you who might be interested, down in the YouTube channel, I have 2 shiurim on Unetana Tokef, one in Hebrew, one in English, which you are welcome. I urge you to take a look and let me know what you think of them. I'm actually very proud of that shiur. And again, Shana Tova to everybody.